Have you ever Googled your address, Jason, just to see what comes up?
You never know what you might find, right?
Well, you did.
Yeah.
And let me tell you, you stumbled onto something pretty fascinating.
Oh.
It turns out your house in Oklahoma City has a connection to one of the biggest events in American history,
Okay.
the assassination of JFK.
Wow. That's something else.
Yeah. So get this.
Okay.
Your search led you to the Warren Commission documents.
The official investigation into Kennedy's death?
Exactly.
That's not something you find every day.
Right.
So how did your house in Oklahoma City factor into all of this?
Well, it all stems from the man I bought the house from,
Okay.
William Keester.
William Keester.
He's mentioned in these documents,
Interesting.
which is strange enough.
Yeah.
But when you start digging deeper, you find he's quite a character.
Okay, so we've got a mysterious figure connected to the JFK assassination and living in your house.
Pretty much.
This is getting good.
So the Warren Commission, they interviewed hundreds of people, right?
Right, trying to piece together what happened.
Trying to piece together exactly what happened to President Kennedy. And for some reason, they thought William Keester might have a piece of the puzzle.
So what did Keester have to do with the Kennedy assassination?
Well, the documents suggest that he provided information to the commission about the attempted assassination of General Edwin A. Walker.
Walker, that name rings a bell.
Yeah, he's a pretty controversial figure at the time, very outspoken, anti-communist.
Right, and his attempted assassination happened before JFK was killed.
Exactly, and here's where it gets really interesting.
Okay, I'm listening.
Keester initially told a reporter he was scared to talk.
Scared to talk? That's a red flag right there.
Right.
Why would he be scared? Was he afraid of being implicated in something? Or was he worried about something else entirely?
Maybe he knew more than he was letting on.
It's certainly possible.
And when you look into his background, it gets even more interesting.
Fill me in.
The FBI reports paint him as a bit of a shadowy figure.
Okay.
He was an Oklahoma City detective who left the force under mysterious circumstances.
Interesting.
Then he became a private investigator working with a man named Cliff Roberts.
Cliff Roberts, and what about him?
He later joined the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation.
Wow. So this Keester guy is connected to law enforcement even after leaving the police force under a cloud.
It's like he was straddling both sides of the law.
Exactly. And his work brought him into contact with some pretty prominent figures.
Oh, yeah, like who?
For example, he did some investigative work for General Clyde Watts, Walker's attorney.
Watts.
Yeah, this wasn't just some random guy. Watts was a powerful figure with connections to the highest levels of Texas society.
Oh, and there's more.
There's more.
Keester also investigated Jack Ruby.
Jack Ruby, the Jack Ruby.
Yes, the Jack Ruby, the man who shot Lee Harvey Oswald.
Hold on, I need a minute to process this. It's almost unbelievable how all these threads tie back to the JFK assassination.
I know, right? It makes you wonder if Keester was more than just a private investigator stumbling onto these cases.
Right. Was he actively involved in something bigger? Was he a pawn in someone else's game?
Okay, so we've established Keester is anything but ordinary. But what exactly was his connection to Lee Harvey Oswald himself?
Well, there is a link. A letter surfaced in 1967 from an unknown author who claimed to have interviewed Keester in Oklahoma City. According to this letter, Keester was investigating the Walker shooting, and he was particularly interested in a man named William McEwen Duff.
Duff, who's that?
Duff claimed he'd seen Jack Ruby at Walker's house before the shooting. Remember, this is before JFK was assassinated, so Ruby wasn't a household name yet.
So Keester's investigating the Walker shooting, and he's digging into this guy, Duff, who claims to have seen Ruby, the man who would later kill Oswald.
Exactly.
It's like a puzzle where all the pieces are starting to fit together, but in a very unsettling way.
And the plot thickens even further. The letter even suggests that Watts Walker's attorney might have helped Duff find a job after he provided information to the Secret Service about Ruby. Now, we don't have concrete evidence to back this up, but it raises some serious questions about Watts's motives.
It sounds like Duff might have been a key witness, or maybe even more than that. What else do we know about him?
Well, his claims about seeing Ruby were never fully substantiated. In fact, the FBI was trying to track him down in 1964, but his whereabouts were unknown. What we do know is that Duff had connections to Oklahoma City. He enlisted in the Army there, and his mother lived in Long Beach, California.
So Duff disappears, the FBI can't find him, and he's connected to both Ruby and the Walker assassination attempt. It sounds like there's more to his story, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. There are a lot of unanswered questions surrounding Duff, and it's certainly an area where further research could be incredibly revealing.
So, Jason, we've gone from you casually Googling your address to uncovering a potential conspiracy involving your former homeowner, a shadowy private investigator, and a mysterious witness who vanished into thin air. All this stemming from a simple house in Oklahoma City.
It's truly remarkable how seemingly ordinary places can hold hidden connections to such significant events. What other secrets could be lurking just beneath the surface? But before we get ahead of ourselves, we need to circle back to Keester. Those FBI reports have a lot more to tell us about his connection to Oswald, and that's where things take a truly unexpected turn. So we left off with William Keester, this former detective turned private investigator,
Right.
entangled in the investigation of the Walker assassination attempt. He was looking into William Duff, who claimed to have seen Jack Ruby at Walker's house, and now things get even more convoluted.
Okay, so where do we go from here?
Well, the FBI reports show that in January 1964, the Warren Commission specifically requested the FBI interview both Keester and a reporter named Jim Standard.
Jim Standard.
Yeah, now Jim Standard was the reporter Keester initially told he was too scared to talk to. It seems the commission wasn't satisfied with Keester's initial reluctance and wanted to press him for more information. They must have suspected he was holding back.
And were they right?
Well, during his interview on January 8, 1964, Keester admitted to the FBI that he had in fact interviewed Duff as part of his investigation for General Watts.
So he confirms he was looking into Duff. But the question is, did Keester reveal anything substantial about what Duff knew or why he was so interested in him?
Good question. According to the FBI report, Keester corroborated Duff's claim of seeing a man resembling Ruby at Walker's house before the shooting.
Really?
He even told them that Duff had already reported this to the Secret Service back in April 1963.
So this is before JFK was assassinated.
Exactly.
Wow, so Duff's claim predates the JFK assassination. He wasn't just making this up after Ruby became infamous.
Right. This adds a whole new layer of mystery to Ruby's actions and potential motives. What was he doing at Walker's house? Was there a connection to the attempted assassination?
It's mind-boggling, isn't it? But here's the catch. Even when pressed by the FBI, Keester insisted he had no solid evidence to support Duff's claims.
How so?
He claimed Duff never explicitly named Ruby, and that Keester didn't believe Duff even knew Ruby until after the Oswald shooting.
It's a curious denial, almost like he's trying to downplay the entire Ruby connection. Maybe he was afraid of getting tangled up in something dangerous, or maybe he was protecting someone or something.
It does feel like he's holding something back, doesn't it?
It does. And remember that anonymous letter we mentioned, the one alleging Watts helped Duff get a job? That letter also had some interesting things to say about Keester.
This is the same letter that claimed Watts used his influence to help Duff after he provided information about Ruby.
Yes.
Okay, what did it say about Keester?
Well, the author calls Keester a real dirt pile, and even goes so far as to call him a keyhole peeper. They even allege that Keester and his partner Roberts were fired from the Oklahoma City Police Department for drunkenness and shooting out streetlights.
Ooh, that paints a rather unflattering portrait of Keester. But it's important to remember that this is coming from an anonymous source. We have to take these claims with a grain of salt.
Good point. But the author goes on to express disbelief that Watts, this respected attorney, would choose someone like Keester to investigate such a sensitive matter as the Walker shooting. They suggest something fishy is going on with the whole arrangement.
It's a valid question. Why would Watts entrust a man with Keester's alleged reputation with such a sensitive investigation? It does make you wonder about Watts' motivations and whether he was truly seeking the truth or had some other agenda.
Right. The plot thickens. The letter also claims that Watts helped Keester and Roberts set up their private detective agency after they were fired from the police force. It's almost like Watts was pulling strings behind the scenes, using these guys for his own purposes.
And remember, both Keester and Roberts worked for the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation at some point.
That's right. Keester's partner, Cliff Roberts, eventually ended up working for the OSBI. It makes you wonder if Watts had any influence within the OSBI as well.
This is a lot to unpack, Jason.
It is.
We've uncovered a complex web of connections between Keester Duff, Ruby Watts, the FBI, the Secret Service, and the Warren Commission. And at the center of it all is the attempted assassination of General Walker, an event that seems to foreshadow the tragedy that unfolded in Dallas just a few months later. It's all starting to feel like a scene from a political thriller.
It's a compelling narrative, and it highlights the far-reaching impact of historical events. Even a seemingly ordinary house in Oklahoma City, like the one you live in, Jason, can hold secrets tied to one of the most pivotal events in American history. But the rabbit hole goes even deeper. The FBI reports contain even more peculiar details, like a report that mentions a mysterious man overheard discussing Oswald in a bar in Winnipeg, Canada, just a few months after the assassination.
Winnipeg. That's pretty far from Dallas. What was this conversation about?
The report says this man was overheard talking about Oswald and using what sounded like coded language. He mentioned Isaacs, a Hoffman, a 58 Dodge, and a sales meeting at a specific location in Kansas City. It almost sounds like a scene from a spy movie.
A coded message in a Winnipeg bar. This is getting stranger by the minute. What was so important that it had to be discussed in code thousands of miles away from Dallas?
That's the question, isn't it? Was this just paranoid chatter, or was there a deliberate attempt to hide something? And it gets even creepier. The report says the man who overheard this conversation felt like he was being watched and even followed by someone else in the bar.
That's unsettling. Who else was interested in Oswald and the events surrounding the assassination? Were there other forces at play operating in the shadows?
It's a possibility we can't dismiss. And remember, this was in February 1964, just a few months after the assassination. The world was still reeling from the shock, and the search for answers was intensifying. It's no wonder people were on edge, suspicious, looking over their shoulders. The assassination of President Kennedy, with its many unanswered questions, had created a climate of fear and uncertainty.
And speaking of fear and uncertainty, the FBI reports also contain a letter from a retired newspaper columnist who claims to have had a rather strange encounter with Oswald on a bus in New Orleans just a few months before the assassination.
Oh, what kind of encounter?
Well, buckle up, Jason, because this is where our deep dive takes a turn into the truly bizarre. So this retired newspaper columnist wrote to the FBI claiming he was riding a bus in New Orleans in August of 1963.
August 1963.
Yeah, when a young man who he later recognized as Lee Harvey Oswald boarded the bus and sat down next to him.
That's just a few months before the assassination. What happened on this bus ride?
Well, according to the columnist, Oswald seemed almost giddy in a state of elation and was looking eagerly at people. He even struck up a conversation with some schoolboys on the bus.
Schoolboys?
Yeah, bragging about a recent trip to Cuba.
A trip to Cuba. Now that's interesting. We know Oswald defected to the Soviet Union in 1959 and eventually returned to the U.S. with his wife, who is Russian. But a trip to Cuba in 1963 during the height of the Cold War would definitely raise eyebrows.
Right, and get this, the columnist claimed Oswald told these schoolboys that he met Fidel Castro himself.
Wow.
And that no prisoners are going to be returned to the United States unless I say so.
That's a pretty outlandish claim. It suggests a level of authority and influence that seems highly unlikely for someone like Oswald.
It does sound like he was embellishing, maybe trying to impress the schoolboys.
Yeah, maybe.
The columnist went on to say he questioned Oswald about this trip, and Oswald claimed he flew to Cuba on a U.S. Army plane, and that the FBI met him at a specific street corner in New Orleans when he got back.
Now that strains credibility. It seems highly improbable that the U.S. government would be involved in secretly transporting Oswald to Cuba, especially considering his past defection to the Soviet Union. This has conspiracy theory written all over it.
I agree. It's more likely a tall tale or even a sign of mental instability on Oswald's part.
That's a good point.
The columnist was concerned enough about Oswald's behavior and claims that he contacted the FBI about the encounter.
He contacted the FBI?
Yes, he said he called the FBI and told them about this strange man on the bus, describing him as probably a nut. However, he also suggested the FBI might want to check their files because there might be something on him.
That's a curious mix of skepticism and concern. He clearly didn't believe Oswald's story, but he still felt it was worth reporting to the authorities.
Right.
You have to wonder, what if the FBI had taken this report more seriously and investigated Oswald's alleged trip to Cuba? Could it have changed the course of events?
It's impossible to know for sure, but it does make you think. What we do know is that just a few months later, Oswald was arrested for the assassination of President Kennedy.
It's a chilling reminder that sometimes seemingly insignificant details can hold crucial clues to understanding major historical events. And in a case like the Kennedy assassination, with its numerous unresolved questions, every piece of information, no matter how strange or seemingly inconsequential, deserves scrutiny.
So, Jason, we've gone from a simple Google search of your Oklahoma City house to a deep dive into the Warren Commission, the attempted assassination of General Walker, a shady private investigator, a mysterious witness who disappeared, a coded conversation in a Winnipeg bar, and a bizarre bus encounter with Lee Harvey Oswald.
Wow, that's quite a journey.
It is, isn't it?
What's fascinating is how this deep dive illustrates the interconnectedness of history. Seemingly unrelated events and individuals can be linked in surprising ways, and sometimes the past can have a profound impact on the present. Your house, with its connection to William Keester, is a tangible link to one of the most significant events of the 20th century.
And it's a reminder that seemingly ordinary places can hold extraordinary stories. You never know what secrets might be hiding in your own backyard.
Absolutely. If you're inspired to delve deeper into this, Jason, I encourage you to check out the FBI's online document vault. There's a treasure trove of information waiting to be discovered.
That's a great idea.
And as always, remember to approach these historical rabbit holes with a healthy dose of skepticism and critical thinking.
Words to live by. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, Jason.
Yeah.
We hope you enjoyed uncovering these fascinating historical connections. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep those Google searches coming.
Yeah.
You never know what you might find.